Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world of whispers and citrus-scented air. The story doesn't begin in New York or Chicago or Las Vegas. It begins beneath the Mediterranean sun, where the hills of Sicily roll like old bones, and the scent of lemon blossoms mingles with gunpowder. You can almost feel the dust rising under your shoes. Hear the hum of cicadas, the murmur of villagers who never say quite what they mean. You wouldn't survive here. Not because of bullets, but because of silence. You'd ask too many questions. And in 19th century Sicily, curiosity was an illness with a short cure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to comment your location and the local time where you're listening right now. Because somewhere, someone else is about to close their eyes and drift into this same quiet darkness. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the 1800s, when Sicily is still a fractured land. Nominally part of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, it's ruled by distant monarchs, distrusted local officials, and the memory of feudal landlords long gone, but never forgotten. The peasants work the soil, wheat, olives, citrus, and the rich oversee from afar, their estates managed by gabellati, middlemen who rent land, collect taxes, and enforce order in ways that don't always appear in ledgers. The government is weak, the police weaker, and justice is a matter of who you know, not what the law says. That vacuum between power and survival is where the mafia grows. The word mafia itself is older and more elusive than the organization it would later describe. Some say it came from the Arabic mahjas, meaning aggressive boasting. Others trace it to Sicilian dialect, mafiusu, a term once used to describe pride, swagger, courage in the face of humiliation. It didn't originally mean criminal. It meant someone who cannot be shamed. In a land occupied by one foreign power after another, Greeks, Arabs, Normans, Spanish, that kind of pride becomes armor. Over time, it hardens into code. You picture it now. A peasant kneeling beside a lemon grove, soil on his hands, murmuring that eternal rule, omerta, the law of silence. Never speak to the state, never confess, never betray a friend. It begins not as conspiracy, but as protection, from corrupt officials, foreign soldiers, and sometimes from justice itself. One verified fact historians agree on. By the time Italy unifies in 1861, the mafia already exists as a social force. Parliamentary reports from that same decade mention secret societies controlling land leases, intimidating voters, and maintaining their own armed guards. Sicily's lemon industry, one of Europe's most lucrative exports, is especially dependent on them. Lemons rot quickly, and protection means profit. Merchants who paid the right men saw their shipments arrive safely. Those who didn't often found their orchards mysteriously set ablaze. Here's your quirky detail. The mafia's first known involvement in lemon trade protection came from a family who actually leased groves from the British consul in Palermo. The mafia was protecting British citrus. Imagine that, international organized crime beginning with lemons for London tea tables. And then there's the uncertainty historians still love to argue over. Was the mafia born as an organized network? Or did it evolve gradually from scattered bands of enforcers? Some claim a secret founding, a cabal of capos agreeing to rules in the shadows. Others see it as something organic, many small groups sprouting independently from Sicily's soil of mistrust and poverty. What's certain is that by the 1870s, the pattern was set. Violence as arbitration, silence as virtue, loyalty as currency. You walk through Palermo's narrow alleys, their walls pockmarked by centuries of bullets and sun. You hear footsteps behind you, but never see the faces. Every shopkeeper pays a little something to someone. Every dispute finds its way to a padrino, a godfather of sorts, long before the word would become legend. These early mafiosi aren't gangsters in suits. They're local power brokers. They dress simply, go to church, shake hands at weddings. They prefer whispers to weapons. Killing is bad for business unless it sends a message. At night, you can almost smell the gun oil mixing with orange blossoms. The air hums with quiet deals. Theft disguised as protection. Loyalty sold as honor. A man who steals cattle calls it justice. A man who collects tribute calls it respect. And slowly, the idea of the mafia moves from rumor to institution, woven into daily life. The Italian government, newly unified, tries to crush it. Troops are sent, mayors are replaced, laws rewritten. But how do you fight an enemy who insists he doesn't exist? Every witness forgets, every record disappears. The mafia thrives in ambiguity. It is both myth and muscle, rumor and reality. When officials finally do arrest someone, the jury mysteriously finds him innocent. When investigators come close, they're reassigned or silenced. You realize that for every man the state punishes, 10 more learn to keep their mouths closed. By the 1890s, the Sicilian Mafia, Cosa Nostra, our thing, has a shape. Families control territories. Codes dictate behavior. Murder requires permission. Money flows upward. It's not a government, not a religion, but it feels like both. And its power doesn't stop at the island's edge. Sicily's poverty is driving thousands to emigrate. Ships leave Palermo every week, bound for Ellis Island, New Orleans, Buenos Aires. In their luggage, they carry olive oil, photographs, and the code of silence. You stand at Palermo's harbor one last time. The sea glitters under the sun, filled with ships heavy with human dreams. Among the passengers are farmers, laborers, and a few men whose faces never quite catch the light. They will plant new roots across the ocean, and in the streets of America, the old codes will find new soil. The mafia, like its lemons, will thrive wherever the air is thick with opportunity and fear. You watch the ship drift from the dock, the cries of farewells fading into wind. The old island recedes, but its silence follows. The code of honor will find its echo in a new world, louder, wealthier, and infinitely more dangerous. You stand now on the deck of a steamship in 1890, the air heavy with salt, sweat, and coal smoke. The Atlantic rolls dark beneath you, and the horizon ahead glows faintly with promise. The deck is crowded with families clutching suitcases, bundles, and rosaries. Children sleep against their mothers. Men smoke in silence. Somewhere among them are the first seeds of a story that will grow roots in American soil. The old Sicilian code of honor, transplanted into the restless, teeming cities of the New World. Below deck, in steerage, the air is stifling. You smell onions, coal dust, sickness. A young man from Palermo traces his finger along the edge of a folded paper. An address in New Orleans, maybe, or Mulberry Street in Manhattan. He doesn't speak English, but he knows the words that matter. Amico, friend, lavoro, work, rispetto, respect. What he doesn't know yet is that these same words, in the right mouths, will soon shape empires. Immigration from southern Italy to the Americas explodes in these years. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 4 million Italians arrive in the United States alone. They settle where work is cheapest and life is hardest. Harbors, docks, construction sites, mines. To many, the police look like just another gang in uniform, the government like another landlord with a different accent. In this uncertainty, the Sicilian way, private protection, family loyalty, silence. Feels like survival, not crime. And so you walk with them off the ship, down the long corridor of Ellis Island, through the questions, the medical checks, the stamps of approval. The Statue of Liberty looms to your left, but no one is looking. They are staring at the city beyond, gray and endless. In the tenements of Little Italy, that old Sicilian code begins to adapt. The Mafia is not yet an empire here, it's a whisper. But whispers in close quarters spread fast. You make your way through New York's Lower East Side, its narrow alleys hung with laundry. The smell of bread and sewage mingles in the heat. Street vendors shout in dialect, boys chase rats with sticks. Crime, poverty, and opportunity live side by side. A few blocks over, Irish gangs run the docks, Jewish gangs the garment smuggling. The Italians, newcomers, and outsiders learn quickly. To survive, they must stick together. And to protect themselves, they need someone. That someone might be a grocer who collects insurance from other merchants to keep their shop safe. Or a barber who knows which policeman can be bribed to look the other way. Or a man called Don, who mediates disputes between neighbors for a small fee. They are the new generation of uomini d'onore, men of honor, born from the same soil as their ancestors, but hardened by America's chaos. Here's the verified fact historians agree on. One of the first major mafia incidents in the United States happened not in New York, but in New Orleans. In 1890, Police Chief David Hennessy was assassinated, and suspicion fell on local Sicilian immigrants. The trial was chaotic. Witnesses intimidated, juries bribed. When several defendants were acquitted, a mob of angry citizens stormed the jail and lynched 11 Italians. It remains one of the largest mass lynchings in U.S. history. That night, the word Mafia appeared in American newspapers for the first time. It became shorthand for all Italians, an invisible conspiracy, an exotic menace. But for the immigrants themselves, it was simpler. The so-called Black Hand was just survival in code. Letters demanding payment, threats written in looping Italian script, sealed with a handprint drawn in ink. Some were real extortion schemes, others were hoaxes invented by police or journalists. But fear has a way of becoming fact. The quirky detail here: many Black Hand letters were written by barely literate men copying from templates sold secretly in immigrant shops. Imagine walking into a back room in 1910 and buying a do-it-yourself extortion kit for a few cents. A blank letterhead with skulls and daggers already printed, needing only a victim's name. Some used them for bluff, others meant business. Either way, the myth of the secret society grew, feeding itself. And yet, historians still argue. Was there really an organized mafia in America before Prohibition? Or were these just scattered, unconnected gangs? Some records suggest early family structures, even oaths of loyalty. Others point out that most mafia trials in the early 1900s failed for lack of evidence. Perhaps the real organization didn't yet exist. It was still learning to breathe in this new air. You walk deeper into Little Italy. The streets hum with the rhythm of work and worry. Men carry crates of fruit. Women scrub steps. In the back rooms of cafes, deals are made quietly. Someone lends money at high interest. Someone else pays for protection against vandals who, curiously, never trouble anyone who pays on time. The pattern is small, local, invisible to the powerful. But for those inside, it's everything. Then you cross 1,000 miles south, down to New Orleans again, where docks creak under the weight of ships from the Caribbean. Here, Italian immigrants mix with older Creole traditions, black laborers, and corrupt sheriffs. Smuggling is common: rum, cigars, fruit, and Sicilian networks fit perfectly into it. A crate of oranges hides a crate of weapons. A missing manifest finds its way into the right pocket. The system works because everyone gets a cut. By the early 1900s, you can find similar patterns across the Americas. In Argentina, Italian immigrants form La Manonera cells in Buenos Aires. In Canada, small-time extortionists operate in Montreal. The Sicilian code travels easily. Distrust outsiders, protect your own, and never talk to the police. It is a creed designed for exile. You sit in a cramped apartment at the turn of the century. A candle burns low. A man counts coins on the table. He has a small business, fruit stand maybe, or laundry, and a letter in his hand. It's a black hand demand for $50. He curses, but tomorrow he'll pay. He doesn't want trouble. No one ever does. Outside, the streetcar rumbles past. Life continues, but somewhere nearby, the first seeds of organized crime are sprouting in the cracks of immigrant life, nourished by fear and silence. And as decades pass, the cracks widen. The country is changing, industrializing, electrifying. Cities grow rich and restless. America is building its own underworld now, brick by brick. And in that shadowed foundation, the Sicilian code finds a new purpose. Soon, laws themselves will turn ordinary men into outlaws. And the small gangs that shake down barbershops and grocers will suddenly control empires of forbidden pleasure. The age of extortion is ending. The age of opportunity, liquid and intoxicating, is about to begin. The year is 1919, and the air in America tastes different now. Restless, expectant, a little electric. The war has ended, factories are booming, and in the crowded neighborhoods of New York, Chicago, and Boston, immigrants are learning how to build small kingdoms out of struggle. You walk down Mulberry Street in Lower Manhattan, the heart of Little Italy. Laundry hangs like banners between tenements. The smell of garlic and coal smoke mingles in the chill. Children shout in Sicilian, Neapolitan, Calabrian dialects that even other Italians can't always understand. And beneath the noise of daily life, another rhythm hums quietly. The rhythm of respect. Here, the new Mafia begins to grow, not from fantasy, but from familiarity. It isn't yet the slick empire of films and legends. It's something humbler, seedier, woven into the lives of laborers, grocers, and longshoremen. You can almost hear the whispered introductions. He's a friend of ours. That phrase means more than friendship. It's a password, a passport, a promise that you belong to someone who can protect you when the police can't or won't. The verified fact anchoring this moment. By the 1910s, multiple small Sicilian gangs were already operating in New York City. The Morello family, based in East Harlem, is widely considered the first true Italian-American crime family. Their specialty? Counterfeiting. They printed fake currency in backroom presses, laundering it through grocery stores and coal yards. Their leader, Giuseppe, the clutch hand, Morello, so called because of his deformed right hand, was one of the first to import old Sicilian methods of secrecy and hierarchy into American soil. His network stretched from New York to Chicago, a web of cousins and friends running money and influence along the rail lines. You pass one of those grocery stores now, its window dusty with flour. The owner nods politely, but his eyes linger on you too long. Behind the counter, in a back room, men talk in low voices, the kind that make the air thicken. On the table are ledgers, coffee cups, and maybe a revolver wrapped in cloth. Every transaction is half legitimate, half shadow. The Mafia's genius lies not in violence, but in its blending of worlds, the respectable and the forbidden. Here's the quirky detail. Some of these early mafia leaders doubled as community mediators. In Little Italy, people went to their neighborhood don not just for protection, but for advice. He might arrange a marriage, settle a debt, or stop a feud. Police and courts were seen as foreign, but the padrino spoke your dialect, understood your shame, and would enforce his verdict with something stronger than paperwork. Justice, Sicilian style, arrived in dark suits and soft voices. Yet the scholarly uncertainty of this era is whether these early gangs already saw themselves as part of a unified Cosa Nostra, or whether that identity came later. Some historians believe these were isolated neighborhood groups, with no overarching leadership until the 1930s. Others argue that even then, a loose Sicilian brotherhood quietly linked them, their alliances maintained by marriage, migration, and murder. You wander west, past the docks. The Hudson smells of salt and oil. Dock workers unload crates under the gaze of foremen who know when to look away. Labor racketeering, control of unions, and hiring halls is already taking root. A man who can supply workers on short notice can also withhold them. Strikes begin or end at his command. A few dollars in the right hand buys a week's peace. A threat whispered at midnight buys obedience. You see it happen in real time. A foreman counting envelopes, a handshake sealing more than a deal. New York isn't the only city humming with quiet deals. Across the continent, in Chicago's Little Sicily neighborhood, the seeds of another empire are sprouting. There, Johnny Torrio, an immigrant from Naples, has learned to mix street smarts with strategy. He'll later become mentor to a young man named Alphonse Capone. But for now, the gangs remain local, territorial, sometimes clumsy. They fight over gambling dens, protection fees, and even fruit markets. In these years, the word family is literal. Each gang built from kin and cousins, and still, it's all small change. Until the government, in its moral zeal, hands them the greatest business opportunity of the century. You pause outside a saloon in 1919. The sign reads, Cafe Italia. Inside, men drink wine, smoke cigars, argue about baseball. Tomorrow, this place will be illegal. The Volstead Act has passed, and Prohibition will soon begin. The United States has outlawed alcohol. Overnight, everything that once flowed freely, beer, whiskey, wine, becomes contraband. And no one is better positioned to profit than those already living in the shadows. The streets change quickly. Old saloons close, and new soft drink parlors open, their doors unmarked. Trucks once used for produce now carry kegs hidden beneath crates of apples. Distilleries move underground, literally into basements, tunnels, cellars. The Sicilian gangs, already experienced in secrecy and smuggling, expand their networks overnight. A man who once protected fruit vendors now protects speakeasies. Another who forged coins now forges delivery papers. The profits multiply, but before that golden rush begins, you linger here in the twilight between ages. The last moment before small-time crooks become kings. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the city holding its breath. The street lamps glow yellow. The trolley rumbles past, and in some apartment above, a violin plays faintly through an open window. Down below, in the cellar of a grocery, men gather around a table. They talk softly about opportunity, about respect, about how America is changing. One of them says, "In Sicily, they took everything from us. Here, we take what we want." The others nod. Glasses are raised, not in celebration, but in agreement. Outside, the night wind carries their voices upward, mingling with the music, the distant horns, the heartbeat of the city. You sense that something immense has begun, something that will soon spill from these narrow streets into every bar, dock, and back room in America. Tomorrow, When the first bottles are smashed in the name of purity, the first fortunes will be made in the name of crime. And the old Sicilian code, honor, silence, loyalty, will find its most profitable expression yet. The air tastes faintly of smoke and whiskey already. The calendar flips to January 1920, and the world wakes up hungover. The United States, in its grand social experiment, has declared war on alcohol itself. Across the country, barrels are smashed, breweries shuttered, and bottles poured into gutters while bands play patriotic hymns. For a moment, the streets smell like a distillery drowned in good intentions. And you, standing in that syrupy air, can almost taste the irony. You wouldn't survive this era either, unless you could bribe the right cop or sell the right bottle at the right price. The verified fact is simple. Prohibition, intended to cleanse the nation's soul, became the Mafia's baptism into power. Overnight, thousands of small, disorganized gangs turned into logistics empires. The demand for liquor didn't disappear, it multiplied. People who'd never broken a law in their lives were suddenly willing to pay, whisper, and look the other way. The underworld stepped forward to provide not just booze, but infrastructure. Supply chains, transport routes, payrolls, distribution networks. Crime went corporate. You're in New York first. It's 1921, and snow drifts along Mulberry Street. Behind the closed doors of restaurants labeled "closed for renovation," bottles clink softly. Speakeasies bloom like winter flowers, some hidden behind barbershops, some under butcher stalls. The police raid 1, 2, maybe 10, but hundreds more open by morning. The real business isn't in the bottles themselves. It's in who controls their movement. And the Sicilian gangs already understand the old rule. The one who controls transport controls the city. You meet a man named Giuseppe, Joe the Boss Masseria. He's heavy-set, slow-spoken. His suit's always a size too large. He controls much of lower Manhattan's bootlegging. On the other side of town is Salvatore Maranzano. Leaner, shrewder, the kind of man who reads Caesar's commentaries and imagines himself as the next empire builder. Between them, the streets fill with tension. Young soldiers like Charles "Lucky" Luciano, Vito Genovese, and Frank Costello cut their teeth running trucks of Canadian whiskey, dodging patrols, bribing customs men. Across the continent in Chicago, the story feels louder, brasher, colder. Johnny Torrio, the quiet strategist from Brooklyn, has built a smuggling network that hums like a machine. His young protege, Al Capone, runs the front lines, collecting payments, settling disputes, charming reporters. The numbers swell. By 1925, Capone's organization is earning over $60 million a year in today's dollars. Chicago is half nightclub, half battlefield. The newspapers call him Scarface. But few dare say it to his face. Here's the quirky detail. One of Capone's most reliable smuggling routes used milk trucks. They ran on fixed schedules, rarely searched, and no one questioned the weight of the cargo. Each bottle of milk clinked softly beside hidden flasks of gin. Housewives poured from one container in the morning and another by night. The Mafia had turned the innocent domestic ritual of milk delivery into a perfect disguise for rebellion. You walk through the back rooms of Chicago's South Side. The wallpaper smells of whiskey and cigar smoke. Men in flat caps shuffle cards while lookouts lean on the window. The jazz outside never stops, but inside, the deals are cold and deliberate. A police captain's name is written on an envelope. A rival's address is whispered. There's a phrase that floats around these rooms. We're not criminals, we're businessmen. But the violence tells another story. Trucks hijacked, breweries bombed, bodies in alleys. The infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929 will become Prohibition's darkest symbol. 7 men machine-gunned in a garage by Capone's men, dressed as police. It shocks the nation, yet even then, people drink that night in speakeasies across the city. The public condemns the blood, not the business. The scholarly uncertainty lies in how coordinated all this truly was. Some historians see the Prohibition Mafia as a disciplined, proto-corporate network. Others describe it as chaotic, a patchwork of alliances held together by fear and profit. What's clear is that the code of honor inherited from Sicily, omertà, mutated in America. It became not just silence toward the law, but loyalty to efficiency. Betrayal wasn't immoral because of faith or family. It was bad for business. You leave Chicago's cold and return to New York, where a quiet revolution brews within the underworld itself. The old Sicilian dons, men like Mafia and Maranzano, still believe in regional loyalties, bloodlines, rituals. Their younger lieutenants, Luciano, Lansky, Siegel, believe in partnerships, profits, and pragmatism. They're not tied to Sicily or superstition. They're tied to the future. In a smoky room above a restaurant, you listen to them talk. Luciano speaks softly but decisively. He doesn't want war. He wants organization. No more bosses, he says. We run it like business. The others nod. They've seen too many funerals. They know America's too big for the old ways. When Mafia is murdered in 1931, while eating a plate of linguine shot by his own men, and Maranzano shortly after, the old world finally dies. The young wolves take over. Lucky Luciano steps into power not as a king, but as a chairman. He calls it the Commission, a board of directors for the underworld. The Mafia has become an institution, modeled on corporations, complete with arbitration rules and annual meetings. Violence, for now, becomes negotiation. You can feel the shift like a change in air pressure. The days of back-alley extortion and petty rackets are fading. The new era speaks in contracts, percentages, and silent partnerships. Casinos in Havana, shipping lines in Florida, unions in New York, all will soon hum under this invisible governance. But for now, prohibition is still the tide lifting all boats. In back rooms, men toast to profits that can't be taxed. In dance halls, women in sequined dresses sip bootleg champagne under chandeliers. And outside, the city hums like an engine running too fast, too bright. You step into the night. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone weeps. A car backfires. It might be music, it might be murder. You can't tell anymore. In these streets, every sound carries double meaning. And above it all, the code endures. Omertà, respect, loyalty. The words still mean something, even as they twist into profit. Soon, the noble experiment will collapse under its own hypocrisy. And when the liquor flows legally again, the Mafia, richer, smarter, untraceable, will not vanish with it. They will simply pivot, quietly, into everything else that makes America run. The night after Prohibition ends smells like spilled beer and relief. December 1933. Across America, corks fly, bands play, people dance in the streets. Bars reopen with shiny new licenses pinned to the walls. But you, standing quietly at the edge of the celebration, notice the one group that doesn't cheer. The men in tailored suits who've made fortunes in the dark. For 13 years, the underworld has run the liquor trade like an invisible government. Now the taps are legal again, and those men are out of business. Or so everyone thinks. You'd be wrong to believe the Mafia ever gives up an income stream. It just reinvents it. The verified fact is that within months of repeal, bootleggers turned their networks toward new markets. Gambling, labor rackets, loan sharking, narcotics. The trucks that once carried whiskey now move slot machines and heroin. The bribed cops stay bribed. The silent partnerships in nightclubs remain profitable. America hasn't eliminated organized crime, it's professionalized it. You walk the streets of New York, where this new order takes shape. The speakeasies have dropped their passwords, but the same owners remain behind the bars. In back rooms, men count money over glasses of bourbon, no longer worried about raids. The underworld has gone legitimate, or at least learned to wear the costume of legitimacy. At the center of this transformation stands one man, Charles "Lucky" Luciano. You see him now, stepping out of a black Packard, his overcoat draped perfectly, his fedora tilted low. He's not the richest or most violent gangster alive, but he's the smartest. He has one idea that will define the next half-century: organization. In 1931, after the bloody Castellamarese War between old Sicilian bosses, Luciano and his allies create the Commission, a governing council that divides the country into territories and families. There are no longer singular kings. Instead, the Mafia operates like a corporation, each family managing its own territory but bound by collective rules. The heads meet to resolve disputes, approve assassinations, and maintain peace. It's democracy for criminals, efficiency wrapped in ritual. Here's the quirky detail. When the Commission first met, Luciano modeled its structure partly on Tammany Hall, New York's political machine. He admired how the politicians controlled votes through favors and loyalty. "We do the same thing," he reportedly said, "just faster." Each family became like a city district: soldiers, captains, underbosses, bosses, chain of command, accountability, hierarchy. The scholarly uncertainty is how far Luciano's network reached beyond the Italian-American underworld. Some historians believe he quietly linked with Jewish and Irish gangsters, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Dutch Schultz, to form what reporters later called the National Crime Syndicate. Others insist this alliance was looser, more myth than fact, born from newspaper imagination. What's certain is that Luciano believed in inclusion, cooperation over chaos. He saw crime as an industry, not a feud. You're in a smoky nightclub in 1935. The floor gleams with champagne spills, the band's trumpet wails, and the laughter of dancers covers the low murmurs at the back tables. Luciano sits with Costello, Genovese, and Lansky, discussing territory, judges, and unions. They drink in moderation, eyes sharp, hands steady. They are not celebrating, they are auditing. Across the room, a police officer sips free whiskey and looks the other way. The Mafia's reach now extends far beyond alcohol. They move into construction, garment factories, trucking, and the waterfront. Wherever labor meets profit, they find opportunity. At the docks, a longshoreman doesn't load a ship unless the union boss, connected to the mob, approves. At a hotel, slot machines hum quietly, their profits split between owners and investors. The city itself has become a portfolio, and not just New York. In Chicago, Capone's empire continues under Frank Nitti and later Tony Accardo. In Detroit, the Purple Gang controls bootlegging routes across the Great Lakes. In Cleveland, Kansas City, and New Orleans, smaller families affiliate with the New York Commission, forming a national map of control. The United States, for the first time, has a unified underworld. But no empire stays invisible forever. It's 1936. You step into the federal courthouse in Manhattan. The marble floors echo underfoot. Flashbulbs pop. On trial is Lucky Luciano himself, charged with running a massive prostitution ring. District Attorney Thomas Dewey leads the case, determined to prove that the Mafia exists and that it has a face. The evidence is thin, but the witnesses, terrified women dragged from brothels, tells stories that stick. The jury convicts. Luciano is sentenced to 30 to 50 years. Still, even from prison, he remains powerful. His allies keep the commission alive. His philosophy, organization, partnership, discretion becomes gospel. By the time he's deported to Italy in 1946, his structure has become permanent. You pause for a moment, thinking about irony. The man who unified American organized crime spends his final decades in exile, watching from afar as his system thrives without him. But history has a sense of theater, and Luciano will have one last act. During World War II, American intelligence agencies face a problem. German submarines are sinking ships off the East Coast, and they need dockside cooperation. The Office of Naval Intelligence quietly reaches out to imprisoned mobsters, including Luciano, to ensure labor peace and protection on the waterfront. The partnership works. In 1946, as reward, Luciano's sentence is commuted, and he's deported back to Italy. Here's the fringe detail whispered even now. Some claim Luciano helped arrange the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, using his old contacts to secure cooperation from Sicilian gangsters. There's no hard proof, but the rumor persists, because it sounds exactly like something the world would do in desperation. The Mafia, once hunted as enemies of civilization, had become unofficial allies of the state. You stand on a dock in Naples in 1946 as Luciano steps off the ship that carries him home. The air smells of diesel and salt. He looks older, heavier, but his eyes are still sharp. Around him, the ruins of war are everywhere, but opportunity hums beneath them. His American empire continues without him, led by men who learned well. Costello, Genovese, Gambino, Bonanno, and Lucchese. 5 names that will soon define 5 families. The pillars of Cosa Nostra's rule. You watch as Luciano disappears into a waiting car, the engine purring like an omen. America has celebrated the end of Prohibition, but in the shadows, its true legacy has just begun. The mob no longer sells liquor. It sells control. It has learned to trade invisibility for power. And as you walk away from the dock, the sea wind brushing your face, you realize something. Every empire begins with a law it learns to break better than anyone else. The Mafia has mastered that art. And soon, the world's most glamorous playgrounds, Vegas, Havana, Hollywood, will become its stage. Section 6. The ocean crossing from Naples to New York is quiet this time. Just a low hum of the engines and the steady slap of water against steel. It's 1946, and you stand near the rail as the skyline reappears. Manhattan rising through the morning haze like a cathedral of ambition. America has won the war. The soldiers are home, the economy booming, the streets loud again. But for the men who run the shadows, victory means something else entirely. A new beginning. The verified fact is that by the end of World War II, the modern American Mafia, structured, centralized, and disciplined, was already in place. The 5 families of New York controlled more wealth than many corporations, their influence stretching across gambling, construction, shipping, and unions. The Luciano blueprint, organization, cooperation, and profit, had outlived its creator. But now, under new management, it was ready to expand. You see them now. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the underworld, who prefers politics to gunfire. Vito Genovese, his ruthless rival. Carlo Gambino, quiet and patient, learning from both. And Joe Bonanno, who still romanticizes the old Sicilian ways. They are gentlemen criminals, the kind who wear double-breasted suits, tip doormen, and talk about our friends downtown. They attend Mass on Sundays, fund hospitals, and own half the vending machines in the city. You walk with Costello through Midtown. The streetlights gleam off the wet asphalt, the sound of cabs echoing down Broadway. He knows everyone, politicians, judges, cops, reporters. Over dinner at the Copacabana, he doesn't boast. He consults. He's learned that power isn't just control, it's credibility. Why threaten when you can be invited to the table? The quirky detail that defines this era is how thoroughly the Mafia merged with the American dream. Illegal money financed legal success. Construction companies built skyscrapers with mob-owned concrete. Unions guaranteed labor peace for considerations. Even the newly opened highways, the veins of post-war America, carried trucks whose cargo lists didn't always match their contents. The mob wasn't outside the system anymore. It was part of it. But historians still argue over one of the strangest, most enduring stories of this time: the Mafia's supposed involvement in the birth of Las Vegas. Was it really the mob that made the desert bloom? Or would the casinos have come anyway, powered by legitimate business? The truth, like heat haze, shimmers between both. You travel west now, over the Rockies, into the Nevada desert. The year is 1947, and the sun looks close enough to touch. There's nothing here but scrub, sand, and a single line of road. And then, suddenly, light. Neon signs flickering against the emptiness. A few casinos, a few motels. A city still small enough that you can drive from one end to the other in 15 minutes. Las Vegas. The government made gambling legal here in the 1930s to revive the state's economy. But it's in the post-war years that the Mafia sees its true potential. The war has left America with surplus cash, restless veterans, and a taste for risk. Nevada offers something no other state can: indulgence without guilt. You step into the Flamingo Hotel, newly opened by Benjamin "Bugsy" Siegel, a gambler, visionary, and friend of Meyer Lansky. The air smells of perfume and sawdust. Dealers shuffle cards under chandeliers. Women in sequins glide between tables. It feels elegant, electric, and a little unreal. Siegel dreams of turning this dusty outpost into an American Monte Carlo. But dreams cost money. And money in this world comes with strings. The verified fact is that the Flamingo nearly bankrupted its investors, most of whom were mobsters back east. Construction delays, theft, and Siegel's extravagance sent costs soaring. In 1947, as losses mounted, the commission grew impatient. That June, Siegel was shot through the window of his girlfriend's Beverly Hills home, an execution as cinematic as it was inevitable. His dream didn't die with him, though. Within a decade, Vegas became a glowing artery of mob cash. You wander the Strip as it grows, the Sands, the Tropicana, the Riviera. Hotels rise from the dust, each partly financed by underworld loans and skimmed profits. The mob's accountants track money like blood. Cash flows from gamblers to the casino cage, from cage to counting room. And from there, a quiet fraction, the skim, vanishes before it ever hits the books. Those missing dollars find their way back to New York, Chicago, and Kansas City, untaxed, untraceable, invisible. There's another expansion underway too, southward into the Caribbean. Havana, Cuba, becomes the mob's offshore paradise. In the 1950s, under dictator Fulgencio Batista, American gangsters invest millions in Cuban casinos and hotels. The city glows with jazz, cigars, and roulette wheels. Meyer Lansky walks the Malecon like a banker reviewing his holdings. Tourists sip daiquiris in the same bars where mobsters sign contracts. Havana is Vegas without the desert. Tropical, corrupt, and legal. The quirky fringe detail here: Lansky once proposed building an entire Bank of the Underworld in Havana, where mob families could store and lend funds without interference from U.S. authorities. Some say he even designed blueprints for it. A real marble headquarters for crime. The revolution in 1959 ends that dream overnight. Castro's soldiers storm the casinos, seizing the tables, the money, the hotels. The mob loses millions, but their lesson is clear. Never tie your future to a dictator's favor. Back in America, the commission adjusts. The profits from gambling flow through Las Vegas, the unions still line pockets, and Hollywood begins to notice. Movies like Little Caesar and The Public Enemy glamorize the gangster. The line between fiction and fact blurs further. Frank Sinatra croons at mob-owned clubs. His friend, Sammy Giancana, helps secure his concert bookings, and perhaps later, political favors. The Mafia's reach now stretches from dockyards to the White House's outer circle, and yet, here's the scholarly uncertainty that lingers like cigar smoke. Did the mob actually decide elections? Some writers claim they helped swing key states in 1960 for John F. Kennedy. Others dismiss it as folklore born from paranoia and gossip. The evidence, like so much in this story, is inconclusive but tempting. What's undeniable is that by mid-century, organized crime had become woven into the fabric of American life, half feared, half adored. You sit now at a blackjack table in the Sands Hotel, the cards soft and worn beneath your fingers. The dealer smiles, the band plays softly, and a man in a tailored suit slides onto the stool beside you. He doesn't introduce himself, but you know who he is. You've seen him before, in smoky rooms, in whispered deals, in every era of this story. He raises a glass. To business, he says. The drink burns smooth, expensive. You look around at the chandeliers, the laughter, the neon glow bouncing off the desert sky. This is no longer the world of Sicilian peasants or tenement extortionists. This is capitalism's dark reflection. Discipline, ambition, and profit taken to their logical, lawless extreme. But the light never lasts forever. Beyond the glitz, shadows move. In government buildings back east, a new kind of hunter is watching. Men with microphones instead of guns, led by a director who once insisted the Mafia didn't exist. Soon, the silence will be broken, the photos will leak, and the men who built empires from whispers will learn that even empires can be wiretapped. For now, though, the night in Vegas is warm. The cards still deal, and the orchestra plays on. You feel the hum of the desert beneath your feet. The sound of an empire unaware it's being recorded. The sun rises over Manhattan, gold sliding across the skyline and catching the gleam of steel, the glint of water on the Hudson. From a distance, the city looks spotless, industrious, every window shining, every street alive. But step closer and you can feel the undercurrent. The rhythm that hums beneath the surface isn't just jazz or traffic or commerce. It's the quiet machinery of control. It's the 1950s now. The war is over. The world feels clean and optimistic again. And New York, the city that never sleeps, is at its glittering peak. But even as construction cranes claw at the sky, 5 invisible families carve out the ground beneath. They have their hands in everything that moves. Trucks, cement, garbage, docks, unions, even the restaurants where city leaders eat lunch. You start your walk on the waterfront, where the smell of diesel and salt never leaves the air. The docks are alive with noise, winches squealing, stevedores shouting in half a dozen languages. But every crate, every paycheck, every shift runs through one gatekeeper. The mob-controlled International Longshoremen's Association. Officially, it's a union. Unofficially, it's the Mafia's cash register. The verified fact. By the early 1950s, control of the docks in New York and New Jersey was one of organized crime's most profitable monopolies. Workers paid kickbacks to keep their jobs, and cargo companies paid fees to avoid delays or theft. The racket was so open that when journalist Malcolm Johnson exposed it in a Pulitzer-winning series called Crime on the Waterfront, the city simply nodded. It was already common knowledge. You picture it. A foreman lighting a cigarette, whispering a name, and an envelope sliding across a crate. That sound, the soft scrape of paper on wood, is what corruption sounds like. The quirky detail that makes you smile, even as it chills you. Mobsters used nicknames not to hide, but to remind. Big Paulie, Johnny the Hat, Tony Ducks, so named because charges never stuck to him. Each name was part reputation, part insurance, a badge of belonging. When someone mentioned Fat Tony, you didn't need a last name. You knew exactly who and what that meant. But behind the bravado, the empire is shifting. Lucky Luciano is gone, exiled to Italy. His successor, Frank Costello, prefers subtlety. Under him, the Mafia behaves like an old money family, polite, discreet, content to collect dividends. His focus is on influence, not intimidation. He builds relationships with mayors, judges, even senators. Why use violence, he tells his associates, when you can buy the same result? Still, the old instincts don't vanish. In 1957, while Costello returns to his apartment one evening, a single bullet grazes his head. He survives, but the message is clear. His rival Vito Genovese is tired of diplomacy. Genovese takes control, restoring fear as policy. Within months, he convenes what he calls the Appalachian Meeting, a grand council of mob bosses from across the country, held in a small town in upstate New York. The goal: unity, expansion, visibility. It's the most ambitious gathering in organized crime's history, and it's also the beginning of its unraveling. You stand in that chilly November air, 1957. The meeting takes place at the home of Joseph Barbara, a soda bottling magnate whose backyard fills with expensive cars and nervous chauffeurs. Around 50 mobsters arrive, New York dons, Chicago lieutenants, even emissaries from Cuba. They eat cold cuts, drink soda, and discuss national coordination. But the small-town police notice. Suspicious of the parade of Cadillacs, they surround the house. When the officers close in, panic erupts. Men in silk suits sprint through the woods, mud on their shoes, ties flapping. The verified result: more than 60 mobsters are detained or questioned. Newspapers explode with headlines. For decades, the FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, had denied that a national mafia existed. Now, photographs of high-ranking gangsters in handcuffs prove otherwise. The myth of the local hoodlum is dead. The mafia is real, organized, and suddenly public. You can almost hear Hoover's teeth grinding behind his immaculate desk in Washington. He'd built his reputation on controlling crime, but now the truth is undeniable. The Bureau begins to pivot. Surveillance, infiltration, wiretaps. The new war begins. Here's the scholarly uncertainty. Why did the mob gather so openly? Some historians think Genovese, newly ambitious, wanted to crown himself capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses. Others believe it was simply poor planning. Too many egos, too little subtlety. Whatever the cause, the Appalachian disaster marks a turning point. The code of silence begins to crack. You return to New York now, late 1950s, and find the streets humming with tension. Genovese, ironically, is soon imprisoned on drug charges, betrayed by his own allies. Frank Costello fades into quiet retirement, The real power shifts to a quieter figure, Carlo Gambino. You see him one afternoon on Mulberry Street, gray suit, unassuming, polite. He rarely raises his voice, never appears in the papers. But everyone knows who really runs the city now. His genius is patience. He doesn't chase headlines. He waits for them to blow over. Under Gambino's leadership, the Mafia becomes quieter, wealthier, more cautious. Murder gives way to mergers. They infiltrate legitimate industries: trucking, construction, garbage disposal, garment factories. If something is built or moved in New York, someone pays tribute. The quirky detail of these years. Mob families began keeping meticulous ledgers, like accountants. They documented loan payments, club profits, and even office expenses. Some used code, others simply trusted that no outsider would ever see. One day, decades later, the FBI would raid a social club and find those notebooks stacked neatly in a drawer. The handwriting was elegant, but power invites myth, and myth attracts attention. In 1959, Hollywood releases On the Waterfront, inspired by those Pulitzer articles. The film's hero is a dock worker who breaks the mob's control by testifying. The line, "I could have been a contender," echoes through America's theaters. The audience cheers, but in the neighborhoods where the real rackets run, people watch silently. To speak publicly, even in fiction, feels dangerous. You stroll through one of those neighborhoods after the credits roll. It's Sunday. Men stand outside cafes in perfect rows, their hands in their pockets, their faces unreadable. Inside, espresso cups clink. No one mentions the movie. No one needs to. By the dawn of the 1960s, the Mafia's empire spans not just cities, but generations. Sons inherit rackets from fathers. Nephews take over union posts. The families, Lucchese, Bonanno, Genovese, Colombo, Gambino, have become institutions as steady as the banks they quietly own shares in. The commission still meets, now in whispers instead of gatherings. The rules remain: loyalty, silence, respect. Betrayal still costs blood. And yet, the first real cracks have formed. The FBI is learning to listen, literally. Tiny microphones hidden in lamps, cars, even shoes begin to capture conversations that once vanished into smoke. Hoover may have ignored the mob for 30 years, but his successors are about to make up for lost time. You stand outside a corner social club one night, the kind with frosted glass and a faded awning. Inside, men talk, laugh, argue over cards. You can't hear the words, but somewhere, an agent miles away can. For the first time, the silence of Cosa Nostra is no longer absolute. Soon, that silence will shatter. Testimony will replace rumor, cameras will replace whispers, and the city that never talks will begin to confess. But not yet. Not tonight. For now, the lights of New York burn bright, the docks thrum with cargo, and the men in gray suits sip their espresso with steady hands, unaware that the world has already started recording them. The air in Las Vegas hums differently now. It's the early 1960s, and the neon feels sharper, brighter, almost electric. The Strip is a river of color running through the desert, and under those lights, the American dream and the American crime story blur together so smoothly that no one can tell where one ends and the other begins. You walk beneath a sign flashing "The Sands Hotel," the bulbs buzzing like bees. Inside, the Rat Pack croons. Gamblers cheer, and champagne flows as freely as oxygen. The night smells of perfume, tobacco, and money. The perfume of legitimacy, but you already know the secret. The city's glamour rests on a quiet arrangement of envelopes and handshakes stretching from Nevada to New York. Each roll of the dice feeds a chain of invisible beneficiaries. the families back east who helped build this empire from the shadows. The verified fact is that throughout the 1950s and 60s, the Mafia controlled or invested in nearly every major casino on the Las Vegas Strip. The profits didn't show up in accounting books. They were lifted directly from the counting rooms before taxes. The skim, as they called it. Cash loaded into suitcases, flown to Chicago, Kansas City, or New York. No receipts, no trace, no witnesses, except loyalty. You walk through one of those counting rooms now, the air-conditioned hum drowning out the outside noise. Stacks of bills rise like small towers. Dealers in short-sleeved shirts work fast, separating chips, counting by touch. Behind them, a single man with slick hair watches quietly. When he nods, an envelope slides into a jacket pocket, and the cycle continues. The casino's bright facade outside is the mask. This room is the heart, and here's the quirky detail. The skim wasn't only about theft, it was an art. Families used distinct methods to remove cash, some through rigged weight scales, others by swapping currency bands or falsifying daily totals. The accounting was so elegant that auditors sometimes thanked them for their efficiency. Even the FBI later admitted that, in the early years, no one could quite figure out where the money went. It simply evaporated. Back east, the commission's network coordinated it all. Chicago's outfit oversaw much of the Vegas operation, with other families taking slices of particular casinos. Frank "Lefty" Rosenthal ran sports betting. Mo Dalitz, a Cleveland figure, managed casino construction. Meyer Lansky still handled laundering and offshore accounts. Together, they made Vegas shine like a crown. You stroll outside now, the night air warm and dry. Marilyn Monroe's face beams from a billboard. Tourists laugh on the sidewalks, oblivious to the men in suits watching from the shadows. Behind every chorus line, there's a payroll to approve. Behind every neon bulb, a kickback. The mob has mastered invisibility, an empire built on hospitality. And then, across the Caribbean, another city mirrors Vegas's fever. Havana. The year is 1958, and you're walking along the Malecon. Waves crash against the seawall. Tropical wind carries music from open bars. Inside the grand hotels, the Nacional, the Riviera, the Capri, roulette wheels spin under chandeliers. American tourists sip mojitos and gamble through the night, unaware that most of the profits feed Lansky's network. The Mafia's Cuban ventures are real, vast, and legal. President Fulgencio Batista welcomes their investments, taking his own generous share. In Havana, the mob finds a paradise without American regulators, where money and influence flow unimpeded. By some accounts, Lansky even drafts plans for a national casino commission, a government-approved way to regulate mob profits. Havana becomes the beating heart of organized leisure. The quirky fringe detail. During these years, Havana hosts an annual underworld summit. Gangsters from the U.S. fly in on private planes to discuss profits and expansion. They meet in hotel suites with palm trees outside the windows, a strange blend of business and vacation. The idea that these men, once dockside thugs, are now wearing tropical suits, discussing tax rates, and sipping daiquiris feels surreal, like watching crime evolve into corporate culture. But history doesn't deal in comfort. In 1959, the Cuban Revolution erupts. Castro's soldiers storm Havana, seize the casinos, and nationalize the banks. The mob's paradise burns overnight. Lansky loses millions. His partners flee back to America, their offshore dreams buried under revolutionary slogans. You're back in Vegas now, mid-1960s. Havana's loss only strengthens the desert. The money that once flowed south is reinvested here. The casinos multiply, the strip grows longer. Frank Sinatra still sings, but the audience has changed. Businessmen, politicians, and tourists crowd the tables. The Mafia, ever adaptable, hides behind layers of legitimate investors. But shadows lengthen in other directions, too. You leave the casinos and travel east to Miami. The air is thicker, the water turquoise. Here, mob connections seep into real estate and shipping. Cuban exiles, Sicilian traffickers, and local syndicates merge into something new, a blend of old Cosa Nostra discipline and the volatile freedom of the Caribbean. Drugs begin to replace liquor as the currency of power. Here lies the scholarly uncertainty. When did the American Mafia first step into narcotics on a large scale? Some say the 1940s, through Sicilian ports. Others trace it to the French connection of the 1960s, a heroin pipeline running from Marseille through Montreal to New York. What's clear is that by this decade, drug money is becoming irresistible. Even the most traditional bosses, once opposed to narcotics, start to tolerate it quietly, their moral resistance melting beneath the weight of profit. You walk down a Miami dock one humid evening. A freighter rocks gently, its hold full of fruit, or something that looks like fruit on paper. A man closes a ledger and lights a cigarette. "Bananas," he says, but his smile gives him away. In the next hour, crates will be loaded onto trucks bound for the Northeast. The paperwork will vanish, and by dawn, so will the cargo. Meanwhile, back in New York, the old guard grows uneasy. The 1957 Appalachian disaster still echoes. The FBI, once complacent, is now listening, watching, documenting. Agents photograph everyone who enters the social clubs. Names once spoken only in whispers, Lucchese, Gambino, Bonanno, now fill federal memos. You picture a small office in Washington, its walls lined with maps and red pins. Each pin marks a family, each string a connection. The myth of the untouchable mob is beginning to fray, and yet, in the streets, life goes on as usual. The city glows, the clubs buzz, the respectable faces of the underworld still wave to politicians at banquets. The mob is at its peak, even as the tide beneath it begins to shift. Here's the final, almost tender detail of this glittering era. In Las Vegas, some casinos kept small side safes labeled "for friends." These funds covered everything from politicians' vacations to priests' donations. The mob, in its strange way, believed in maintaining community. Corruption, after all, worked best when everyone benefited just enough to stay silent. You step back outside. The strip stretches before you like a mirage, color, sound, excess. Somewhere in the crowd, a man in sunglasses watches quietly, taking notes. The lights blur, and you realize what you're really seeing. The moment before a fall. Soon, microphones will hide in lamp fixtures, senators will shout on television, and the empire of charm and neon will start to dim. But for now, the dice keep rolling, the jazz keeps playing, and the illusion of forever still holds. The hum of Las Vegas fades behind you, replaced by a quieter, more bureaucratic sound. The turning of typewriter keys, the shuffle of paperwork, the static of recorded tapes. You've crossed from the smoky back rooms of casinos into the fluorescent-lit offices of Washington, D.C. and J. Edgar Hoover's Federal Bureau of Investigation. It's the early 1960s, and the most powerful lawman in America still insists that the Mafia is a myth. You wouldn't survive this contradiction. A world where the government's top cop denies what every bartender in Brooklyn already knows. Hoover's FBI tracks communists, spies, and radicals, but not mobsters. The reasoning, or excuse, depends on who you ask. Some say Hoover believed publicity about organized crime would tarnish America's image. Others whisper that the Mafia had compromising information about him. Rumors, photographs, favors. There's no proof, of course, only silence, and the strange comfort that silence brings to both sides. The verified fact is that during most of Hoover's long career, the FBI officially refused to acknowledge the Mafia's existence. From the 1930s through the 1950s, the Bureau maintained files on Italian criminal societies, but treated them as local phenomena, never as a national network. Even after the 1957 Appalachian fiasco, Hoover publicly downplayed the idea of organized crime. When asked, he said, "There is no mafia. There are criminals. You stand in his office in your imagination. Polished desk, spotless carpet, the air cold enough to sting." Hoover's suit is impeccable, his expression colder than the air. Behind him, walls of filing cabinets hold secrets on senators, celebrities, and civil rights leaders. But not on mob bosses. The Bureau's priorities are political, not criminal. Hoover hunts influence, not blood. Meanwhile, in New York, the Mafia thrives under the radar. Frank Costello's quieter diplomacy, Carlo Gambino's patience, and Meyer Lansky's financial genius ensure that business flows uninterrupted. Politicians and police chiefs alike attend charity galas sponsored by local businessmen. It's a golden age of invisibility. Here's the quirky detail that defines this era. When Hoover finally acknowledged organized crime in the early 1960s, he didn't do it because of mob violence, but because of the Kennedy brothers, John and Robert. They made it personal. Robert F. Kennedy, as Attorney General, publicly mocked Hoover for ignoring the Mafia and poured federal resources into new investigations. In 1961, Hoover shifted the FBI's focus almost overnight, launching what became known as the Top Hoodlum Program. Every major city received orders. Identify your leading organized crime figures, surveil them, and record everything. You watch as field agents begin their quiet war. Cameras hidden in parked cars, microphones embedded in bar ceilings, tiny transmitters disguised as cigarette packs. For the first time, the government listens. The sounds are mundane: coffee cups, laughter, dice rolling. But among them are the words that will one day fill indictments. Still, the early years of the FBI's anti-mob campaign are clumsy. Agents follow the wrong men, wiretap the wrong phones. Many can't tell the difference between a soldier, a capo, or a civilian relative. But slowly, the picture sharpens. The families become visible. Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese. Each mapped, each charted like constellations on a dark boardroom wall. The scholarly uncertainty here lies in motive. Did Hoover truly fear political fallout? Or was his delay strategic, buying time to build cases quietly? Some historians argue he avoided the mob for decades because the Bureau lacked legal tools to prosecute them effectively. Others see pride, denial, or worse. Whatever the reason, his eventual awakening comes too late to prevent the Mafia's peak. You leave Washington and walk the streets of New York again. It's 1963. Pay phones ring, taxis honk, steam rises from manhole covers. In the boroughs, men in dark suits step into diners for morning coffee, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, that someone might be listening. You step into one of those diners, sliding into a cracked vinyl booth. The coffee is burnt, the air heavy with cigarette smoke. Across from you, two men speak in code, their words casual but careful. "Our friend from the other side. The shipment's good." You realize how much of mob life depends not on violence, but on conversation. Deals aren't shouted, they're murmured. Control isn't seized, it's offered and accepted. But silence has limits. In June 1963, Joseph Valachi, a low-level soldier in the Genovese family, breaks omerta, the sacred vow of silence, and becomes the first made man to publicly testify against the Mafia. The verified fact. Valachi's televised hearings before the U.S. Senate introduced the American public to the words Cosa Nostra and family not as metaphors, but as organizational reality. Sitting behind a microphone, sweating under the lights, Valachi sketches charts, names ranks, and explains rituals. "It means our thing," he says softly. The senators lean forward. America leans closer. The quirky human detail. Valachi was not motivated by conscience, but fear. He believed his bosses had ordered his execution after a mix-up in prison. Turning informer was his only path to survival. His testimony, though sometimes exaggerated, confirms decades of rumor. The Mafia, once invisible, now has faces, names, and structure. You imagine Hoover watching the hearings on television, his jaw tight, his immaculate hair unmoving. He no longer denies the Mafia, but he also refuses to celebrate his late arrival. The Bureau's work continues quietly, expanding into narcotics, extortion, gambling, and union corruption. The mob's reach is so vast that it's not a matter of if someone is compromised, but how much. In this new decade, the underworld feels both stronger and shakier than ever. The public fascination grows. Hollywood begins to circle. In 1969, a young writer named Mario Puzo starts drafting The Godfather, drawing loosely from Valachi's revelations and whispers from old neighborhoods. 2 years later, the movie's release will mythologize everything the FBI is trying to dismantle. The real mobsters, amused, attend premieres, buying out entire rows. You pause at the end of the 1960s. The country itself feels different now, distracted, divided, and idealistic. The old Mafia code, duty, honor, loyalty, seems almost nostalgic in a world of protests and television. But beneath that nostalgia, new threats rise. Narcotics will soon flood the cities. The old dons, cautious and deliberate, will be replaced by impatient men with quick tempers and quicker appetites. As you stand again on the streets of Manhattan, the wind whipping between towers, you feel it. The balance tipping. Hoover is aging. The world is listening. The silence that built the Mafia is beginning to crumble. And yet, the machine keeps turning. Louder, smoother, more modern than ever. You pass a newspaper stand. The headlines scream about politics, war, and space. But below the fold, in smaller type, another story runs. Mob hearings continue. FBI promises crackdown. You smile faintly, because you know how this goes. Every time the world believes the mob's finished, it resurfaces. Leaner, quieter, more invisible than before. The night falls. Somewhere downtown, an agent adjusts his headphones. Somewhere uptown, a capo raises his glass. Between them lies America's oldest dance. Silence against curiosity, loyalty against law. And for now, the music still plays. The sound you hear now isn't jazz or the clink of casino glasses. It's the click of a tape recorder being switched on. Somewhere in New York, a federal agent leans over a desk, splicing together magnetic reels. The year is 1970, and the quiet war between law and silence is about to turn into an all-out siege. You drift through this new decade as if walking through the smoke left behind after fireworks. The 1960s burned bright. Vegas, Cuba, Sinatra, the glory days of the Commission. But that light's fading now, replaced by the cold, fluorescent glare of congressional hearings and courtroom cameras. The world has learned the word Mafia. The law has found its new weapon, the verified fact. In 1970, Congress passes the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO for short. It's the most powerful legal tool ever designed against organized crime. Before RICO, prosecutors could convict only individual mobsters for individual crimes. Now, They can target entire organizations. If one member commits a crime for the benefit of the group, the whole family can be charged. It's like finding the thread that unravels an entire suit. You stand in a courthouse hallway, marble underfoot, the air cool and echoing. A federal attorney adjusts his tie, holding a folder labeled United States v. Organized Crime Control. The Mafia, for decades untouchable behind layers of intermediaries, faces a new kind of threat, one that doesn't need a confession, only connection. Meanwhile, the men being hunted are changing too. The old dons who survived the 1950s and 60s now live carefully, wary of microphones and betrayal. Gambino grows older and quieter, ruling from Long Island like a retired king. Bonanno fades from power after his failed coup, the so-called Banana War, a messy attempt to take over the commission in the mid-1960s that ends with exile. Others, like Vito Genovese and Joseph Profaci, have long since been replaced. A new generation, pragmatic, impatient, sometimes reckless, takes their places. Here's the quirky detail. Many of these new leaders have college degrees. They invest in stocks, speak English without accents, and attend Rotary Club dinners. They're the suburban mafia, fathers who mow their lawns on weekends and balance books by night. They inherit their father's codes, but not their restraint. To them, the family business is less about honor and more about diversification. And then there's Joe Colombo. In 1970, he does something no mobster before him dared. He goes public. Colombo forms the Italian-American Civil Rights League, a group ostensibly fighting prejudice against Italians. But really, it's his way of deflecting FBI scrutiny and painting himself as a patriot. He holds rallies, appears on television, even gives speeches at Madison Square Garden. The sight is surreal. A mob boss addressing cheering crowds about equality, but the performance ends violently. In June 1971, Colombo is shot in the head at one of his own rallies. He survives, but is left paralyzed, and the message is unmistakable. The Mafia may be a business, but it is still ruled by silence. You don't turn the family into a brand. By now, the FBI has become an omnipresent ghost. Bugs hide in social clubs, bars, even churches. The Bureau's black bag teams break into homes at night to plant wires. Agents watch funerals with telephoto lenses. Every laugh, every handshake, every coded phrase becomes evidence. Hoover, who once denied the Mafia existed, dies in 1972. And under new leadership, the Bureau doubles down. The era of glamour is over. The era of paranoia begins. You step into a typical mob hangout of the early 1970s. A social club in Brooklyn, the kind with linoleum floors, wood paneling, and a small television tuned to horse races. The men inside talk about unions, garbage routes, and trucking contracts. On the surface, it's boring. That's the trick. The most powerful people in the room look like your uncle, your neighbor, the man who owns the local deli. But above them, hidden in the light fixtures, the microphones are listening. Here's the scholarly uncertainty. Was this the beginning of the Mafia's decline, or simply its evolution? Some historians say the 1970s marked the end of the traditional Cosa Nostra, the old world code collapsing under modern surveillance. Others argue that the mob adapted, embedding itself deeper into legitimate business, surviving precisely because it learned to look ordinary. Both are right in a way. The Mafia is dying and thriving at the same time. Outside New York, the map expands. Chicago's outfit continues its grip on Vegas and Midwestern unions. In Florida, Santo Traficante Jr. maintains power, bridging old Havana connections with new ones in Latin America. Out west, Los Angeles sees brief flare-ups of its own family activity, quieter but persistent. The Mafia is no longer an East Coast phenomenon, it's continental. And yet, something darker bubbles beneath. Narcotics. Heroin and cocaine flood American cities, and with them, money beyond imagination. The Sicilian connection grows strong again, linking U.S. families to traffickers in Palermo and Marseille. The older bosses hate it. Drugs attract heat, informants, chaos. But younger soldiers see the profits and take the risk. You can almost feel the tension building in the air, a split between tradition and temptation. The quirky fringe story whispered by agents in this era involves Frank "Lefty" Rosenthal, the casino manager who inspired Casino's Sam Rothstein. The FBI found that Rosenthal kept notebooks describing loans and investments that looked suspiciously like laundering schedules. He was polite, even friendly, during interviews. "It's just business," he'd say. He wasn't wrong. That phrase, "just business," had become the mantra of the entire underworld. By the late 1970s, RICO prosecutions begin to hit. Entire crews are indicted, not for murder or robbery, but for conspiracy. It's elegant. The law has learned to punish the pattern, not the act. Courtrooms fill with wiretap transcripts, voices of men who once seemed immortal. Jurors hear laughter, orders, complaints about slow payers, even birthday wishes. For the first time, the Mafia sounds human, and that makes it vulnerable. Still, the public fascination deepens. Movies like The Godfather Part II, 1974, and Mean Streets, 1973, redefine the gangster not as villain, but tragic hero. You watch them in a dim theater, the projector flickering. On screen, crime looks almost noble. Family, loyalty, tragedy. Off screen, the real thing is losing court cases. The mobsters themselves love it. FBI bugs record conversations of bosses quoting Don Corleone, comparing themselves to characters. Fiction has become camouflage. You leave the theater, stepping back into the 1970s night, and realize how strange it's become. The mob is both myth and reality, collapsing and immortal, hunted and adored. The FBI has names, tapes, and maps, but what it doesn't have yet is the courage to dismantle the entire machine. That courage will come soon, from a new generation of prosecutors, journalists, and eventually traitors from within. For now, you walk past the Brooklyn docks again. They're quieter now, automated cranes replacing men with hooks and ropes. The old social clubs remain, their signs faded, their laughter forced. A few still believe the golden days will return. Others know better. You hear one man mutter as he stubs out his cigarette. It ain't like before, everyone's talking now. You look up. In a nearby car, a long-lens camera glints. Somewhere, another tape recorder spins. The silence that once protected them has become the soundtrack of their own undoing. Soon, even the loyal will talk. The code will break completely. But for tonight, the reels keep turning. The neon hums faintly over the city, and history leans forward, ready to press play. The sound that opens this decade isn't music. It's the low whir of cassette tapes sliding into evidence boxes. The 1980s arrived not with jazz or cigars, but with courtroom fluorescent lights, chain-link fences, and the echo of reporters shouting outside courthouses. You wouldn't survive the heat of these lights. Not the sun's warmth, but the legal kind. The spotlight of a government that's finally learned how to see in the dark. The verified fact. Between 1980 and 1990, federal prosecutors bring more successful RICO cases against organized crime than in all the decades before combined. The Mafia, once a secret shadow, now appears in mugshots, indictments, and televised perp walks. You start in New York, where 5 families, Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, have ruled for half a century. Their bosses still hold meetings, still swear oaths of loyalty, but the world around them is collapsing. The FBI's wiretaps, once experimental, have become an art form. Agents sit in vans disguised as plumbers, listening to club conversations in real time. Every cough, every whisper, every mention of the envelope becomes evidence. You imagine one of those social clubs now. Wood-paneled walls, espresso machine humming, a deck of cards mid-shuffle. Outside, the street looks ordinary, maybe even peaceful. Inside, the walls themselves are listening. The quirky detail that defines this era is just how domestic the surveillance became. Some agents installed bugs in lamps, coat racks, even the salt shaker on the bar. One famously hid a microphone in a crucifix on the wall, a tiny betrayal in the shape of faith. When those recordings played in court, the juries didn't just hear crime, they heard boredom, family squabbles, jokes. The mobsters didn't sound like movie villains. They sounded like anyone's uncles arguing about money and respect. That ordinariness destroyed their aura. But the FBI's technical triumph needed muscle, and that muscle arrived in the form of witnesses. The unthinkable was happening. Made men, bound by oaths older than their grandfathers, began to talk. The first major crack comes in 1979, when former underboss Ralph Salerno cooperates with authorities. But the real earthquake hits in 1984 with Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, a Gambino underboss whose testimony will later bring down the most infamous Don of them all. You walk into that courtroom in 1992, the culmination of this decades-long hunt, and see him, John Gotti, the dapper Don. His suits gleam under camera flashes, his smile sharp, his hair perfect. He's everything the Mafia used to be. Confident, charismatic, unafraid of light. The press loves him. Crowds cheer outside the courthouse. For years, he's beaten every case through intimidation and silence. But not this time, because sitting just a few feet away in the witness box is Gravano, his right-hand man, his friend, now turned government witness. His voice is calm as he recounts murders, meetings, and payments. "I was with him," he says, gesturing toward Gotti. "He gave the order. The jury listens. The myth collapses. When the verdict is read, guilty on all counts, the courtroom falls silent. Gotti, the man who once turned trials into theater, will spend the rest of his life in prison. Gravano, who killed 23 people by his own admission, walks free years later under witness protection. The code of omertà, the silence that defined the Mafia for centuries, is dead. But let's step back a bit, because before the fall of Gotti, the 1980s are a decade of paradox. While prosecutors dismantle the mob's public face, its financial reach quietly deepens. Construction, sanitation, garbage hauling, waste management, trucking, and Wall Street all bear invisible fingerprints. The mob learns to launder money through shell corporations and real estate. New York's skyline grows on foundations partly poured with mob-controlled concrete. The line between legal and illegal becomes a blur of cement dust and paperwork. You visit one of these construction sites early morning, the air thick with the smell of rebar and tar. Workers move fast, cranes swing overhead, and foremen shout orders in Italian-accented English. Behind the scenes, contracts are rigged, unions bribed, safety inspections lost. A concrete pour delayed by one day could cost millions. But a phone call to the right businessman fixes it immediately. Efficiency, bought and sold. The quirky detail that amuses you. Even Wall Street wasn't immune. By the late 1980s, the mob had infiltrated the stock market's pink sheets. Low-value stocks ripe for manipulation. Brokers in tailored suits took orders from men who still met in social clubs with espresso cups. Crime had gone digital before anyone else realized it. Still, the glamour was gone. The older bosses were dying, jailed, or irrelevant. The younger ones grew reckless, drawn to fast money and drugs. Cocaine flooded the streets, and with it came a new breed of criminal. Flashier, louder, addicted not to loyalty, but to excess. The Mafia's careful hierarchy began to fray. Here's the scholarly uncertainty. Historians still debate whether the Mafia truly declined in this period, or simply evolved into a quieter form. The FBI, after all, measured success by arrests and convictions. But even as bosses went to prison, others stepped into their shoes. The families shrank, restructured, decentralized. Power didn't vanish. It scattered. Some experts argue that the very visibility of Gotti's fall was the Mafia's rebirth in disguise, forcing it back into shadows where it thrives best. And shadows, as you've learned, are patient. Across the ocean, another transformation brews. In Sicily, the Cosa Nostra wages its own brutal civil war. Judges and prosecutors are assassinated, entire families wiped out. The violence shocks even hardened mobsters in America, who have long since learned that discretion outlives domination. Yet those Sicilian ties never truly severed. Money still flows between Palermo and New York. Heroin profits, laundered cash, whispered alliances. The old roots continue to feed the new branches. You end this decade not in a courtroom, but in a quiet bar somewhere in Queens. The television above the counter plays the news. Another mob trial, another mugshot. The bartender turns down the volume and shrugs. They're all gone, he says, or hiding. You sip your drink, watching the city lights blur through the window. He's wrong, of course. They're not gone. They've just changed shape. Somewhere in an office downtown, a man with no criminal record signs a contract that still pays tribute to people who haven't existed legally in 50 years. Somewhere in a suburban garage, a cash counting machine hums quietly. The mob doesn't vanish. It matures, becoming indistinguishable from the world it once defied. And yet, one truth remains. Loyalty still matters, even when it's only nostalgia. You hear an old capo once tell an agent during an interview, half joking, half serious, "We had rules. You people don't. That's why you'll never win." Maybe he was right. Maybe the Mafia's endurance wasn't in its power, but in its code, simple, brutal, ancient. Protect your own. Never talk. Respect the system even as you corrupt it. Outside, the night air of New York smells faintly of rain and exhaust. The city's older now, wearier. But under its streets, under its glass towers and crowded trains, the pulse that started in Sicilian citrus groves still beats. Softer but steady. And as you walk home through the hum of traffic, past the ghosts of old social clubs turned into coffee shops, you realize the story isn't ending. It's only changing tense. From past to present, you wake to the heat of the South. The air smells of diesel and mango, of salt and gasoline. The calendar reads early 1980s, and your feet touch Latin American soil. An empire under construction, but not the kind the Mafia once ruled from dark bars in Brooklyn. This new one hums on jungle runways and island harbors under the roar of cargo planes. The Mafia's shadow stretches here now, across oceans, languages, and frontiers, chasing a product far more profitable than whiskey ever was. Cocaine. You wouldn't survive this heat, not from the sun, but from the business itself. Everything down here moves too fast. Planes landing at night, ships switching flags, governments changing hands. The old Sicilian and American bosses had structure, rules, family councils. But this This is chaos made profitable. The verified fact. By the 1980s, the American Mafia, though wounded at home, was deeply entangled in international narcotics. The old heroin French connection had faded, replaced by cocaine flowing from Colombia's Medellin and Cali cartels. Though the Mafia never controlled the trade outright, it built bridges, money laundering, distribution, and connections to the cities where demand exploded. You start in Miami, where humid air clings to your skin like a film. The city glows at night, new towers rising, nightclubs booming, boats idling at marinas. But beneath the salsa music and pastel suits lies something wilder. Cocaine money floods the streets, buying everything from politicians to banks. They call it the cocaine cowboys era, and it makes even Vegas look cautious. Here's the quirky detail. At one point, the Miami Federal Reserve ran out of vault space for cash. Air-conditioned rooms overflowed with bricks of currency wrapped in rubber bands, literal mountains of money stacked to the ceiling. The flow was unstoppable. The drug lords brought the supply, but someone had to move the money. And that's where the old Mafia found its niche. You meet them in hotel lobbies and quiet restaurants, the surviving Sicilian and Italian-American fixers. Their voices are calm, their suits understated. They aren't smugglers or killers anymore. They're accountants, bankers, middlemen. They open offshore companies in Panama, wire cash through Switzerland, and convert drug profits into legitimate investments. Restaurants, construction firms, shipping lines. In New York, the mob's own families adapt to this new rhythm. The Lucchese and Gambino outfits handle smuggling routes through the ports. The Bonanno family, long tied to Sicily, mediates heroin pipelines that still trickle across the Atlantic. But it's the Genovese family that perfects the art of invisibility, creating shell corporations so dense even the FBI can't always tell where the money ends and the family begins. The scholarly uncertainty here lies in how much control the Mafia truly had over this new trade. Some historians argue they merely facilitated it, the way a harbor facilitates ships, earning fees, ensuring discretion, but never commanding the ocean. Others claim they still pulled the strings, quietly guiding billions in profits behind a facade of decay. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Old power adjusting to new chaos. You travel south again, this time to Colombia. The air is heavier here, thick with jungle moisture and gunpowder. Men in aviator sunglasses load white packages onto planes under the glow of floodlights. Pablo Escobar, the king of Medellin, rules this world now. He doesn't answer to anyone, not even to the Sicilians. Yet somewhere in the fine print of his empire, you still find the fingerprints of Cosa Nostra. Money needs washing, after all, and that's a skill the Mafia invented. You sit one night in a Bogota hotel, ceiling fan creaking above, the sound of gunfire faint in the distance. A man across from you, Italian by accent, pours rum into 2 glasses. "We don't move the product," he says softly. "We move the money." And that, more than anything, explains how the Mafia survived its so-called death. Back in America, the landscape shifts again. The Reagan administration declares its war on drugs. Federal agencies multiply, task forces form, surveillance expands. Miami becomes a war zone in all but name. Body counts rise, car bombs explode, and the Mafia finds itself both benefiting from and endangered by the chaos it helped create. Here's another curious detail. One of the most successful front businesses for laundering drug money wasn't a casino or a bank. It was pizza. During the 1980s, the FBI uncovers what it calls the Pizza Connection, a heroin distribution network run by Sicilian mobsters using pizza parlors across the U.S. to mask shipments and cash flow. The bust, in 1987, involves over $1.6 billion in drugs and earnings. The irony writes itself. America's comfort food turned into its narcotic artery. You follow the trail from New York to Palermo, Italy, where the Sicilian Mafia, La Cosa Nostra's ancestral cousin, wages a war against the Italian state. Judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, national heroes, are assassinated by car bombs in 1992. Their deaths ignite outrage, but also cooperation. For the first time, Italian and American agencies share intelligence on a massive scale. The Atlantic, once the Mafia's moat, becomes a bridge for law enforcement. Meanwhile, in New York, new faces rise. The old dons, Carlo Gambino, Paul Castellano, Anthony Corallo, are gone. Some dead, some imprisoned, some quietly replaced. Their successors are less cautious, less refined. They drive flashy cars, talk on bugged phones, pose for tabloid cameras. The dignity of silence gives way to the intoxication of attention. You step into one of their clubs in Brooklyn, 1988. The decor hasn't changed. Linoleum, cheap chairs, a television showing baseball. But the conversation has. It's not about unions or casinos anymore. It's about Miami, Colombia, currency exchange rates. The Sicilian words mix with English, the sentences with greed. You sense the fracture, the loss of something old and almost sacred. Even within their own ranks, men start to talk. Some out of fear, some out of frustration, others simply out of fatigue. The witness protection program expands, relocating entire families to the Midwest under new names. By the end of the decade, more than 1,000 mobsters have flipped. It's as if silence itself has turned state's witness. Still, the Mafia's influence lingers like perfume, subtle, persistent. They invest in art galleries, stock markets, waste management, even computer companies. They've learned that real invisibility doesn't come from darkness, but from daylight. If your business looks ordinary enough, no one asks who signs the checks. The quirky fringe rumor you hear whispered among agents. During this period, the Mafia allegedly tried to invest in Hollywood films, not for glamour, but to launder money. Some say even low-budget crime dramas in the 1980s had consultants who knew a little too much. It's impossible to prove, but the pattern fits. Where there's cash and story, the mob has always found a way in. By the dawn of the 1990s, the old legends, Luciano, Lansky, Gambino, are long gone. The commission is fractured, RICO prosecutions continue, and the new generation of criminals no longer speaks Sicilian. Yet the spirit of organization, of disciplined profit wrapped in myth, endures. You leave Miami one last time, standing on the pier at sunset. Cargo ships move slowly toward the horizon, their decks loaded with containers. You know some carry furniture, electronics, textiles. You also know some carry something else entirely. But you'll never know which. That's the point. The waves lap gently against the hulls. The city glows behind you, neon shimmering across the water. Somewhere out there, someone counts money that doesn't exist on paper, and someone else dreams of being the next legend in a world that refuses to die. You inhale the sea air and smile faintly. The Mafia didn't disappear into prisons or graves. It dissolved into the bloodstream of modern life, into offshore accounts, real estate deeds, and company mergers. It became the silence between transactions. And as night falls on the Caribbean, you realize this is the last great frontier of that old brotherhood, the one that began with oranges and daggers in Sicily, and now hides behind spreadsheets and smiles. You arrive back in America just as the neon of the 1980s fades into the gray of the early 1990s. The music is quieter now, less Sinatra, more static from late-night radios. A new word has begun to replace Mafia in newspapers. Corporation. The old dons once ruled from smoky cafes and dim social clubs. Their heirs now wear suits, carry briefcases, and attend Chamber of Commerce luncheons. The face of power has changed. But when you look closely, the hands that hold it still move the same way. Quietly, efficiently, and never without purpose. The verified fact. By the 1990s, the American Mafia no longer controlled its territories through brute intimidation. It controlled them through contracts, real estate, and influence. It was the age of the white-collar mobster. Men who could launder $1 million with a phone call, but still kiss their rings at weddings out of respect for tradition. You walk through Lower Manhattan on a weekday morning. Briefcases click open. Coffee cups steam. On paper, everything looks clean. But beneath the towers, the city's infrastructure, garbage disposal, construction, waste management, is still bound to old alliances. Trucking companies with 3 employees win multi-million-dollar contracts. City inspectors turn a blind eye to cement deliveries that never arrive. The mob no longer needs guns to control the streets. It has paperwork, the quirky detail that makes you pause. In the early 1990s, some mobsters carried pagers not to coordinate hits or drug deals, but to manage stock trades. They called them portable offices. One Gambino associate reportedly joked that, "We used to count cash, now we count digits." Progress, he called it. Evolution. You wander farther uptown, into the marble corridors of midtown banks. Inside, polite men in gray suits shuffle funds between accounts with keystrokes. It's all so quiet, so sterile, that it feels almost holy. And yet, somewhere between those transactions, the same code persists. The invisible favor, the unrecorded agreement, the understanding that loyalty is currency. The Mafia has gone digital. But for all its adaptation, this era is defined as much by collapse as by evolution. The trials of the late 80s have taken their toll. The Commission, once the ruling council of the entire American underworld, no longer functions. Most of its founding families are leaderless or fractured. The Lucchese family loses half its hierarchy to prison. The Bonanno family, once exiled from the Commission for Chaos and Betrayal, barely holds together. The Colombo family tears itself apart in a bloody internal war that spills onto the streets of Brooklyn. The Genovese family remains the strongest, but even it must operate with unprecedented caution. Here's the scholarly uncertainty. Is this decline permanent or cyclical? Some criminologists argue that the Mafia's structure, hierarchical, patriarchal, based on personal loyalty, couldn't survive globalization and surveillance. Others believe it simply went deeper underground, moving into quieter industries. Securities fraud, offshore banking, internet scams. The difference between extinction and camouflage has never been blurrier. You sit now in a courtroom in 1992, the tail end of the Mafia Commission trial, watching the final act of a generation. The defendants, men who once shaped the country's underworld like architects, sit in suits behind bulletproof glass. Their faces are calm, their expressions unreadable. When the judge reads the sentences, hundreds of years combined, no one flinches. The code remains. No emotion, no surrender. The quirky human moment comes after the verdict, when a reporter shouts, "What do you think, Mr. Lucchese?" One of the older bosses, already half deaf, leans toward his attorney and mutters, "I think I need a coffee." It's absurdly ordinary, and that's what makes it beautiful. Even in defeat, the Mafia holds on to its peculiar grace, the belief that dignity, not power, is what endures. Yet while the traditional mob crumbles, a new form of organized crime emerges to fill the vacuum. Russian syndicates, Albanian crews, Dominican and Mexican cartels all learn from Cosa Nostra's playbook. But unlike their predecessors, they aren't bound by ritual or heritage. They're multinational, fluid, ruthlessly efficient. They operate through computers, not confessionals. You can feel the shift, history bending toward a new kind of darkness, less romantic, more mechanical. The Mafia adapts again. By the mid-1990s, surviving families move heavily into construction unions, waste disposal, and Wall Street manipulation. Some take stakes in high-tech startups, others in the booming real estate markets of Florida and Las Vegas. Their goal isn't control anymore. It's permanence. They no longer want to own the city. They want to blend into it. You meet one of these men, let's call him Tony, in a quiet cafe in Staten Island. His handshake is firm, his voice low, his watch expensive but tasteful. He doesn't talk about family or loyalty. He talks about zoning laws, tax codes, and import tariffs. "We used to have muscle," he says with a smirk. "Now we have lawyers." Still, old habits die hard. When a rival refuses to sell a property, it burns mysteriously overnight. When a politician resists a zoning proposal, an anonymous campaign donation changes his mind. Violence hasn't vanished. It's just evolved into paperwork and persuasion. You stand one evening on the Brooklyn Bridge, watching the skyline shimmer in the river. Somewhere below, in old warehouses converted into offices, the same men or their sons count digital zeros instead of cash. The tools have changed. The creed hasn't. Here's another quirky detail. During this period, the mob begins using funeral homes as their new social clubs. After law enforcement shuts down the old bars and cafes, the families realize no one questions men gathering at a funeral parlor. It's perfect. Privacy, legitimacy, and coffee always brewing in the back. More than one major deal of the 1990s was reportedly struck over caskets. The 1990s also bring the media's final romanticization of the old mafia. Shows like The Sopranos turn mobsters into flawed anti-heroes, men haunted by anxiety, trapped between tradition and modernity. Ironically, the show's realism is so sharp that actual mobsters watch it religiously. FBI wiretaps later capture conversations where soldiers debate the accuracy of certain scenes. One capo reportedly sighed, "That Tony Soprano's got it worse than me, but art imitates life only so far." In reality, the power structures that once made the mafia immortal are dissolving. Wiretaps, RICO laws, digital banking transparency, and changing values all erode what used to be a sacred system. The grandchildren of made men go to college instead of the life. Some enter politics, law, or finance. Irony layered on irony. You walk through Little Italy near the end of the decade. The old storefronts are closing, replaced by chain restaurants and souvenir shops. Tourists pose under red and green lights, snapping photos of a culture that once terrified the nation. It feels like walking through the ruins of an empire disguised as a theme park. Yet there's one thing the mafia understands better than anyone else: disappearance. It's what they've always done best. Not death, vanishing. The art of becoming mist. So maybe the story doesn't end here. Maybe it just thins out, quiets down, migrates offshore, into hedge funds, shipping companies, cryptocurrency, art auctions. You can't kill an instinct. You can only watch it change shape. You pause on the corner of Mulberry Street in Grand, the same place where fruit carts once paid protection a century ago. The air smells of garlic and nostalgia. A young couple walks by, laughing, oblivious to the ghosts in the walls. And for a brief, flickering moment, you can almost see them, the men in hats and trench coats, The glint of a fedora brim, the swirl of cigarette smoke, before they fade back into memory. Because that's what history does. It doesn't bury things. It teaches them how to hide. The new millennium begins not with a bang, but a hum. The digital buzz of screens, data, and invisible transactions. The world has gone online, and the Mafia, older than the telephone, must now learn the language of the internet. You wake one morning to the glow of a computer monitor instead of a sunrise. Somewhere in that blue light, the mob is already adapting. The verified fact. By the early 2000s, the American Mafia no longer resembled the cinematic version of itself. It had transformed into a network of businessmen, brokers, and middlemen, operating through limited liability companies and offshore accounts. Law enforcement still called them families, but the structure was looser, more modular, more corporate. The days of smoky social clubs were gone. The new battlegrounds were boardrooms, banks, and browser windows. You walk through Wall Street, where the marble lobbies smell faintly of disinfectant and money. Everyone looks busy, everyone looks legitimate. But if you trace the ownership of certain firms, waste management, construction, import-export, you'll find familiar names buried under layers of holding companies. The same surnames that once ruled Brooklyn alleys now appear in Delaware tax records and Bahamian shells. The quirky detail that makes you pause. When investigators began digging into one major internet gambling ring in 2004, they discovered it was operated not by hackers or teenagers, but by the descendants of old mob families. The servers sat offshore, the accounts in multiple currencies. Bets came in from around the world, football, boxing, horse races, and millions flowed through digital wallets faster than any counting room could have dreamed. The old code, trust, silence, division of profit, had simply been uploaded. You visit one of these digital counting rooms in your imagination. A sleek condo, blinds drawn, multiple monitors glowing in the dark. Men who would once have worn silk suits now wear hoodies and wireless headsets. Their slang has changed. Transactions, servers, uptime. But the energy is the same. The hum of hidden money, the thrill of invisibility. And yet, this new frontier is also a reckoning. The FBI's cyber division, born in the 1990s, matures in this decade. Algorithms replace informants. Paper trails become data trails. Money that once moved in cash envelopes now leaves fingerprints in binary. It's no longer enough to swear loyalty or burn ledgers. The servers remember everything. Still, even as digital surveillance grows, the Mafia continues to find new ways to survive. Some families invest heavily in construction booms. Post 9/11 rebuilding, Las Vegas expansion, Florida development. Others move into waste recycling and logistics. A few experiment with counterfeit luxury goods, cigarette smuggling, even art fraud. It's not glamorous, but it's lucrative and invisible. The greatest trick the mob ever learned wasn't violence. It was invisibility through normalcy. You sit in a small cafe in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, around 2007. The espresso machine hisses softly. The crowd is older now, quieter. Men still greet one another with handshakes and cheek kisses. But the talk isn't about hits or territory. It's about real estate, taxes, permits. You hear one man grumble, "The new guys don't even speak Italian anymore." The others laugh, but there's sadness underneath. The world that once made them gods has been gentrified. Here's the scholarly uncertainty. Has the Mafia truly weakened? Or has it just become so efficient that we've stopped noticing it? Criminologists disagree. Some point to statistics. Fewer murders, fewer indictments, fewer public trials, as proof of decline. Others argue those numbers reflect success, not failure. The underworld learned to live quietly, embedded inside the world above. Like roots under concrete, unseen but essential. You step outside the cafe, the air crisp. Across the street, a yoga studio fills what used to be a social club. The old neon sign, Roma Cafe, still hangs above the door, its letters faint but legible. A ghost of a name for a ghost of a world. But even ghosts have their moments of defiance. In 2011, the FBI conducts one of the largest mob takedowns in U.S. history. Over 100 arrests across New York, New Jersey, and New England. The charges range from racketeering to extortion to murder for hire. For a moment, it feels like the old days again. Cameras flashing, agents shouting, headlines screaming mob crackdown. Yet by nightfall, the city's rhythm returns. Nothing really changes. The quirky human detail. When some of those arrested appeared in court, their lawyers argued that the Mafia no longer exists. One defense attorney even joked, these men couldn't organize a backyard barbecue. The judge didn't laugh. Neither did the FBI. But you could sense the fatigue. Both sides trapped in a myth that refuses to die. And while America's Mafia fades from the spotlight, its cousins abroad thrive. The Sicilian Cosa Nostra continues in new forms, alongside the 'Ndrangheta of Calabria and the Camorra of Naples. Organizations far richer, far more international than their American descendants. They deal not in extortion or protection, but in global finance, energy contracts, and narcotics supply chains. The American Mafia has become a relic of their success, a seed that grew elsewhere. Still, remnants endure. Weddings still happen in certain restaurants. Old men still gather in back rooms to discuss business. Every few years, a new acting boss is quietly arrested. The newspapers write about the end of the mob again and again, as though saying it enough times will make it true. You watch the city lights flicker from a rooftop. The world feels smaller now, monitored, recorded, connected. You wonder how an organization born in the vineyards of Sicily managed to survive into the age of smartphones. But then you remember, it was never just about crime. It was about belonging. In a world that forgets names and faces faster than ever, the Mafia's true product has always been identity. Here's a quirky story whispered by one retired FBI agent. During a 2015 wiretap, he overheard two young associates debating cryptocurrency. "You can't trace it," one said. "It's like cash, but better." The other laughed. "Yeah, until your password gets whacked." Even in the digital age, the humor and fatalism remains intact. The lines blur more each year. Money flows through invisible channels. Power hides behind algorithms. Loyalty migrates into encrypted chat rooms. Maybe the Mafia isn't disappearing. Maybe it's becoming the architecture of modern corruption, the unacknowledged foundation beneath the skyscrapers of globalization. You take a walk along Mulberry Street one last time. Tourists eat gelato, snapping selfies beside plaques marking historic Mafia landmarks. The irony is thick. 100 years ago, those same cobblestones were slick with fear. Now they're just decor. But the story isn't over. You can feel it in the rhythm of the street. The quiet heartbeat that history refuses to silence. A black sedan rolls slowly past. A man inside glances out the window, expression unreadable. Maybe he's nobody. Maybe he's legacy. Either way, he doesn't stop. The city swallows him, as it always does. The world thinks the Mafia is gone. The Mafia knows better. It's strange, isn't it? How something built on fear, loyalty, and silence can outlive almost every government, trend, and empire it once defied. You stand now in the present day. looking at the skyline of the Americas, New York, Chicago, Miami, São Paulo, Mexico City, Buenos Aires. And you realize the Mafia's story has never really been about one place or one people. It's a reflection of the continent itself. Ambition and desperation locked in an eternal handshake. Hey guys, tonight we aren't in a smoke-filled speakeasy or a neon casino. We're in the quiet hum of modern life, the version of history that hides in plain sight. The Mafia of today doesn't wear fedoras or flash rings. It wears business casual, manages logistics chains, and quotes quarterly profits instead of omerta. But listen closely, and the rhythm is still there. The whisper of deals done off record, the nod that means trust, the smile that means silence, the verified fact. Organized crime in the Americas didn't die with the old dons. It evolved. Today, the descendants of the original Cosa Nostra operate alongside or within new syndicates. Brazil's PCC, Mexico's Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels, Central America's MS-13, even cybercrime rings in Canada and the US. They don't call themselves Mafia, but their structures, the hierarchy, the loyalty, the secrecy, are unmistakably inherited. The old seed planted in Sicilian soil has become a forest of shadows, stretching from Alaska to Argentina. You begin in Mexico, where the sun bakes the hills of Sinaloa. The drug trade, once a side business, has become a government unto itself. The cartels control roads, towns, and sometimes entire regions. Their leaders use the same tools as the old dons: bribery, protection, and ritual, but amplified to a terrifying scale. The Sinaloa cartel's plaza bosses function almost exactly like Mafia capos. Tribute flows upward, violence flows downward, and silence is enforced by fear rather than respect. The Mafia's code, reborn in another language. Here's the quirky detail. Some modern cartel leaders, especially in Colombia and Brazil, adopt the Mafia's old Catholic aesthetics. Gold crucifixes, icons of saints, even statues of the Virgin Mary watching over warehouses filled with cash or contraband. Scholars call it narco-religion, but it's older than that. It's the same old ritual, sanctifying power with symbols of purity. It's how the Mafia always justified itself, sin wrapped in sacrament. But as you move north again, into the United States, the lines blur further. The FBI still conducts periodic raids, arresting men in their 70s, gray-haired and careful, for crimes committed in the 1980s. The press calls them the last of the old Mafia. The mugshots look tired, almost gentle. Yet even as the old blood fades, new currents run beneath. A federal agent once said, "The Mafia doesn't vanish, it retires into consulting." He wasn't joking. In construction, waste management, shipping, real estate, the remnants of Cosa Nostra still guide business the way coral guides a reef, dead on the surface, alive underneath. Every time a contractor in New Jersey accidentally overbids and still wins the deal, or a casino license changes hands quietly overnight, you can almost hear that old whisper: respect, loyalty, silence. You step into a corporate boardroom in Midtown Manhattan, the view stretching over glass and clouds. Men and women in suits discuss mergers and logistics. There are no threats, no raised voices. But one of the companies involved, a shipping firm perhaps, or a trucking subsidiary, has a lineage that leads back to a name you've seen before. The trail isn't criminal anymore. It's cultural. The Mafia didn't disappear. It professionalized. The scholarly uncertainty of our age is whether this new invisibility marks the end or the perfection of the Mafia. Historians argue, can an organization still exist if it no longer calls itself by name? Can a code survive without the ceremony that created it? Some say the Mafia is dead, a relic of an analog world, undone by the internet, globalization, and too many movies. Others whisper that its spirit now animates corporate fraud, political lobbying, and even the digital underworld of cybercrime. Maybe the Mafia didn't die. It just went wireless. You walk through the streets of Brooklyn at night. The neighborhood's changed. Boutiques, vegan cafes, expensive apartments. But under the noise of espresso machines and music, you still sense it. The gravity of old rituals. At a restaurant that's been open since the 1920s, a table in the corner is always reserved, even when the rest of the place is full. The waiter says it's for regulars, but never names them. Sometimes you wonder if that's superstition or continuity. And then there's the human detail, the one thread that never fades. In communities across the Americas, from New York to Naples to São Paulo, the myth of the Mafia still commands a strange respect. To some, it represents corruption. To others, resilience. The immigrant's revenge against poverty, the outlaw's dream of order. Its contradictions are what make it immortal. The Mafia is both parasite and protector, predator and mirror. You visit a small town in southern Italy one last time. The soil where it all began. The citrus groves still glow under the sun, the smell of oranges sweet and faint. Somewhere beneath these roots lie the bones of the first men of honor, buried with their secrets. The world they built crossed oceans, survived wars, reinvented itself with every new technology. It became something larger than crime, a mythology of belonging, a code for those who felt outside the law's protection. You think about all the people who've lived and died inside that myth. Bootleggers, union bosses, casino kings, exiled dons, betrayed soldiers. You think of the laughter in back rooms, the handshake deals, the quiet toasts made under watchful portraits of saints. You realize that the Mafia's real legacy isn't money or violence. It's the belief that loyalty, true, absolute loyalty, can rewrite destiny. And yet, as you stand here, the world feels colder. Cameras on every street, databases tracking every face, algorithms predicting every purchase. There's no room left for the kind of secrecy that built the Mafia's empire. Or maybe that's what they want you to think. Maybe invisibility has evolved beyond the need for shadows. Because when you pay cash at a corner restaurant, when you see a new skyscraper rise faster than it should, when a waste contract quietly changes hands, or when you hear an old Italian song drifting from a passing car, you can't help but wonder. Somewhere, someone still counts. Somewhere, someone still nods, still keeps score. You look up at the night sky over Manhattan. Planes blink above, ferries cut across the harbor. The city hums with a million deals, legal and otherwise. And you remember the first rule ever whispered in the Sicilian hills centuries ago. The world runs on favors, not laws. The faces change, the tools evolve, the world moves on, but the rhythm remains. The Mafia never needed to rule forever. It just needed to become ordinary enough to never disappear. And now, as the lights of the city fade into distance, you feel the hum of history quiet down. The noise of money and ambition dissolves into a low, steady pulse. The heartbeat of human desire itself. Every empire ends the same way, not with a scream, but with a whisper. You close your eyes and see all of it passing by like a film reel. The orange groves of Sicily, the immigrant streets of New York, the smoky jazz bars of Chicago, the neon desert of Las Vegas, the humid docks of Havana. Each scene fades into the next, a century of shadows and light. The men who once ruled those worlds are gone now. Their suits hang in museums, their names carved into headlines long yellowed by time. But the lessons remain. Loyalty has power, silence has price, and every promise leaves an echo. Somewhere tonight, maybe not far from where you are, someone still raises a glass to an unseen boss, a forgotten code, a half-remembered story. The world doesn't need to know their names anymore. History already does. So breathe out. Let the noise go. The past is quieter now, distant but alive, like a heartbeat beneath your pillow. You've walked through centuries of ambition and secrecy, and come out the other side still listening, still curious, still safe. The city sleeps above you. The stories sleep within it. And if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the faintest sound of coins, laughter, and the soft clink of a glass raised to invisible company. History always whispers, even when it pretends to be silent.